All right. Again, a warm welcome to everyone. It's a pleasure to introduce to some of you that don't know her, my good friend and sister, Miss Terry Lockwood, and she is going to share with us at this time her testimony.
Hello, everyone. You all hear me? Happy Preparation Day. I'm really glad that Ken has given me this opportunity. It's been a trying week. I think the enemy tries to attack when you have something like this. I've never done my testimony in a way like this before. And so it's just been difficult to try to think about, and you go over your life and you try to think about what's the purpose of all. But it's been a blessing for me. And what I've learned through this process is that the things that we go through in life, I think God allows it to, we all know this, to develop our characters and such, but also each thing, it seems, has a particular purpose. So I'll go ahead and just start from the beginning about my life and to share about it. And I'll start at the very beginning about, I was born in Houston, Texas. So I'm a Texas girl too, kind of. But my parents, when I was young, I was around two or 3 years old, they separated. And so my mom left my dad and moved to California with me and my two brothers. And we lived out there, got a small place, moved to different places around. My mom became a registered nurse. And so that's how she cared for us, is that she was a single mom as a registered nurse. One thing about my family is that although my mom was raised in a household where her mom apparently was in church all the time, every Sunday, my mom didn't have seemingly an interest in religion, or didn't get us involved in religion at all. My earliest memory of organized religion was when I was like 8 or 9 years old. And we moved to California, but my grandma and would let us come back, and my dad, and we would go back to Texas almost every summer and live or stay with them for the summer, either my grandma or granddad. Well, my grandmother's church would have vacation Bible school. And so we got to go to vacation Bible school, and it was a positive experience. And I remember the one thing that just stuck with me, and that was my motivating factor of wanting to go to that thing, because I had no concept of really church, was that we made one year a little knick-knack box or jewelry box or whatever out of cigar boxes and dried noodles and silver paint. And so that was my, experience with church. It was a place that you did fun stuff and got involved in that way. But for some reason, I don't know, it ended where we didn't get to go that much anymore. And so the next memory that I have is going back to California. My mom had a really good friend. Her name was Barbara. And Barbara came to my mom one time and told her that there was a church. It was a little Baptist church, I believe. I'm not positive. But there was an awesome pastor there, and it was a program and all of that. And I remember my mom, him and I, but she eventually let us go. We all started going to church. And the pastor was fantastic. I believe that that was my first introduction to Jesus, and the love of Jesus was through that church and that pastor in particular. The love of that pastor that he had for the people in his church, and particularly the children in the church. He loved us, and we could tell, even though we hadn't even been there. I think we had just been going a few months, but he gave you his ear, and he gave you his time, and he was just really, really caring. And he eventually talked my mom into letting us do a Christmas program, first time we'd ever done anything like that. And so we were looking forward to going to church every Sunday at that time. But the sad thing is that within less than a year, the pastor died. He wasn't that old, but I guess he had a massive heart attack or something, and he died. and the church went through turmoil, and it wasn't a place that my mom wanted to be anymore. So we stopped going to church and just went back to our old lifestyle. Well, that same friend that introduced my mom to that little church, I don't know what she was going on in her life, but she introduced my mom to Buddhism. And so my mom started getting involved a little bit with Buddhism or whatever. And so whatever my mom was involved in, of course, we were involved in, me and my two brothers. And so she taught us how to do some of the Buddhist chants that they did, and said, you know, if you ever needed anything, ever any trouble, you do these chants. So that within that time period, that year, we went back to Texas for that summer and went to my great grandmother's house. And it was a huge thunderstorm that came, something I'd never heard. It was just horrifying. It was just so loud. So I'm sitting in the chair and I'm just rocking and chanting this Buddhist chant over and over, because that's what you just say, these things over and over again. I don't even want to say them. I hate that it whenever I talk about it, that it's even still in my mind. But I would repeat this chant, and my great grandma said, "Baby, what are you doing? What are you saying?" And I told her, and she was like, "No, no, honey, you don't do that. You know, you don't do that in here. I don't want you ever doing that." And I didn't understand. All I knew is that my mom said that this was help me if I was ever in need. And so that is my only real memory of with Buddhism, because shortly after that, I don't know who my mom may have spoken to, but she got out of it fairly quickly and apologized to us for having ever involved us um, into something like that. The next experience that I remember with religion it came about in a crazy, crazy way. And I say crazy because my mom, probably when I was close to 11 years old, she got married or remarried. The crazy thing about it is that she married a man that was in prison, and he was a childhood friend of hers. He used to live in Texas, but he had also moved to California, and got arrested and was in prison. And he was in prison for murdering a woman. Well, of course, he told my mom that he didn't do it, that, you know, he had been set up, and people put him in prison falsely. And so my mom spent her time working as hard as she could to get him out of prison. Well, during that time, she went ahead and married him while he was in prison. And we would go there to see him. He was at the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo in California. And we loved it. I mean, we loved him. We were just like, we couldn't wait for him to get home. We were going to change our names to his last name. We just thought this was the best thing ever. And in the meantime, while they were trying to work getting him out of prison, he owned some property, a duplex, where it was 2 apartments. His ex-wife still lived in the upstairs apartment. So we moved to the downstairs apartment. So his ex-wife was living there. My mom and I and my brothers, we lived in the downstairs. They did not get along, needless to say. And it was just volatile. But surprisingly, the ex-wife invited us to church. And so she invited us to church, and my mom went, I think maybe once, but me and my brother started going. My mom and the ex-wife, they rarely ever went, but this church had a program that was fantastic for youth. They had a fantastic youth program. And so whether the parents went or not, they had a bus, an old school bus, that would drive around to the neighborhoods of any child that said that they wanted to go, and they would pick you up and bring you to church. And so we would go to church, I think it was on Thursday nights, and then we would go to church on Sunday, and we would be there. And so that was impactful for me to have that experience, to be able to go to church. And I started having connections with people that were Christians and kind of learning about Christianity, still not knowing a whole lot. Eventually, my stepdad came home. My mom worked hard and she got him released from prison, probably within another a year or so. So I was probably around 12 or 13 maybe when he got out of prison. And of course, things went south or left or whatever you want to call it really quickly when he got home. He showed his true colors and he was a horrible person. As far as, you know, I don't want to judge people in this way, but she did find out that he murdered that woman. It was not an accident. Nobody set him up. He did do what he did, but he had a lot of other horrible things that he did, and one of them was abuse. And he started abusing my mom. And so the one thing I'll tell you, and I'm going to tell you this story just because of God and what he did and worked in my life during this horrible incident. So one night, well, after my stepdad got out of prison, his ex-wife moved, and she had his daughter and another daughter, and they left and moved. And my mom and my stepdad moved upstairs into that apartment. Well, I was about 15 years old and I lived downstairs by myself. Well, my mom kind of lived in between, so she would check on me to make sure everything was okay. But she lived upstairs with my stepdad. Well, one night I was in my bedroom. It was early enough. I wasn't ready for bed, still in my regular clothes and everything, but somehow I ended up falling asleep on my bed, and something startled me in the middle of that. And I jumped up and I didn't know what it was. And I ran outside. Something before I ran out, I had a stick laying on my wall, told me to grab that stick, but I didn't because I didn't know what was going on. And I ran outside to see, and I see my mom running down the street with my stepdad running behind her, screaming. And I see her turn the corner, and my heart just dropped, and I start running after them. By the time I saw, I didn't know where they had gone, and then I hear screaming. And when I looked down, she had run through the alley behind our house. And when I looked, he was standing over her, stomping her in her head and her back and just really abusing her. And by the time I ran and got to them, he was sitting on top of her, just pounding her in her head and face. It was an alleyway, and it was really clean. Our neighborhood was a clean neighborhood, so there was no garbage and thing that you could find, just anything. But by God's grace, it was trash night. And I was able to grab something out of the trash can, and I hit my stepdad. And he turned around and cursed at me and said that he was going to kill me. And I knew from his face that he was. And so I took off running as fast as I could back around to our apartment and into our apartment, and ran and closed the door. I'm just shaking, and got on 911 and called, and I'm waiting and not knowing what to do because we had different windows all in the back gate. I had no idea where he was going to come from. And so the next thing I know, I hear a bamming at the front door, just bamming, bamming, bamming. And so I go into the side of my bedroom and I open the window and think I'm going to flip out and jump and try to run back up the street and find my mom. Well, when I open the window, and I'm on 911 calling the police at that time too, and telling them what's on. And so when I open the window, all of a sudden the bamming stops. And I don't know what to do because I don't know if he's coming around to my bedroom window or if he's going to the back or what. And so I'm just praying for God to please help me. And then all of a sudden I hear the bamming started again. And I run to the back of our kitchen in our house and open the window, and it's our backyard there and by that alley. I flip out of that window and run. We had a 10-foot fence back there, 8-foot, 10-foot. I don't even remember hardly touching it, and was able to get over and go and run up the street and hide in some people's apartment down by their steps. And the next thing I know, I see police lights and a helicopter shining down on me. And then a police car pulls up and they tell me to come out over the helicopter, come out. And I'm, with my hands up, I come out. And then this is the time my mom comes out, and she's all beat up and bruised and everything, and just really in bad shape. And they get us, and the thing about this story, the police go back around to the house and they find him there still at the house. All he had was no shirt on and underwear, and he had gotten a big garden brick, big garden stone, and was at the front door trying to burst in the door with that big garden stone. And they got him and they were able to take him to jail. We ended up going back to that house. Do you know that they weren't able to get that door open? They had to replace the whole door. And I believe that that was a miracle that God did for me that night in protecting me from him getting in there, because I believe that he would have killed me if he would have made it in there. But sadly to say, a few days later, my mom went and she bailed him out of jail. And she said that that we had no way to help pay the rent and all of that. And so she needed to try to do what she needed to do so that we could have a place to live. Well, he was doing such horrible things that my brothers had already left. They had already left and moved back to Texas with my dad. And so after this thing happened with my mom, and I realized that she really wasn't going to leave, I left too. And I moved to Texas and I lived there with my dad. And my dad had gotten remarried by then too. So I had a stepmom and a stepsister too. So my brother and I, and my stepsister, Audrey, we call her Pookie, we all lived together. And my stepmom had gotten into church. And she was a Pentecostal. So that was a whole new experience for me, for us, to start going to a Pentecostal church where it was super lively, lots of music, guitars, drums. And they went to church a lot and they stayed a long time. You know, Sundays, you can, from 9 o'clock in the morning, you would be there, you would have a break to get some food, little break, come back at 3, and then you would be there until like 11:30 at night. I mean, it was unbearable. I don't want to say that I hated it, but it was unbearable. And as kids do, they know how to manipulate. And so I knew how, at that young age, how to manipulate. So I told my grandmother, who was a Baptist, that my stepmom was making us go to this church all the time, and it was weird and all. So she called my mom. My grandma was like, "You're Baptist," which we weren't. We had not gotten baptized or anything. But got my mom to agree that we did not have to go there. And so we stopped. You know, I stopped. I said, "You can go to the Baptist church." So I got to stop going to that Pentecostal church. Well, anyway, that time with my dad, we went through a lot. Still, not a lot of religion, not a lot of life-changing religion, I should say. But I guess it was still things that helped change my life and made me learn a lot being involved there. So eventually, I moved back to California with my mom and my stepdad. And by this time, I was 15, almost 16 years old. Started going to a new high school. And this is then where I met the love of my life, my only husband, Mark. We met at 16. And so it was like a break right around Christmas time, I think. And school was out and we had gone to a house party. And he came and asked me to dance at this house party. And so we danced and we talked and everything. Thought he was a nice guy, but for some reason he didn't. My grandkids are over here, so they're all laughing right now at this story. But for some reason he didn't ask for my phone number, I think. And so we just talked a little bit and then went on about our business. Well, when school went back in after the winter break, we ended up being in a history class together and getting to know each other. And then we ended up being on the track team together. And Mark had tons of girls after him. There were all kinds of girls, just every time track, they would just be all over him, anything. But he ended up choosing me. And I was really, really grateful for that. But it's funny how God works things out. Living there still with my mom and stepdad, I still was going to that church that his ex-wife had introduced us to. So the bus was still going. Well, Mark ended up going there with me, and it ended up being in his old school neighborhood. So he knew a lot of the people that went to that little church too. So he started going with me, although he had a little bit of introduction to Adventism. His family had gone to a tent meeting or something, so he knew about the Sabbath. But he started going and going to Sunday with me, and also the bus would pick us up, and we would go, and we would be there just religiously, as they say. And so we really started learning about the Lord, getting closer to the Lord in a way that I had never experienced anyway, but we still didn't know a lot. And we were teenagers and doing things that we didn't know that we were not supposed to be doing unless you were married. Um, but Mark was serious about his walk with the Lord as far as the knowledge that he had. For me, I was a person that I was still in party mode, and I love to dance and I love to go to parties. And so at our school, they would have noontime lunch dances. And so at lunchtime, you could go into the party and, dance and everything for like 30, 45 minutes before you went on to class. And so I would do this every day or whenever they would have it. I think Mark may have gone once and then he was done, and I couldn't get him to go with me anymore. And what I ended up finding out, that either a teacher or a coach was having lunchtime Bible studies, and Mark wanted to go to Bible studies. And I'm like, why in the world would you go to a Bible study when you could go to a dance? And so, but he was serious and he would be there. And eventually he talked me into coming with him. And I started going in. We started studying and getting more serious, but still, we didn't know about the other things that we were not supposed to be doing. And I remember one night when we had gone to the youth meeting at the Baptist church, and I ended up finding out that I was pregnant. And we had to tell them. And the one guy's name was Chris, and he called us in and he was like, what are you guys doing? You've been studying everything. Don't you know that fornication is a sin? And we were like, what is fornication? It's like we had no clue of what he was talking about or whatever. And so then he explained, and we were like, well, it's happened, and this is where we were. So I got pregnant, and things just started going awry with us and our relationship, of course, and school and everything. My mom was from an old school camp, and although she wasn't very religious, she was of the mindset of, you're not going to make our family look bad, and you're not going to go to this school pregnant. And because our school, we had a new principal, and he had put in a program for pregnant students that they could still stay in school. They had childcare there and all of that. But my mom was like, no, you're not going to do that. You're not going to embarrass our family. So she sent me to a maternity home. And I lived in a Catholic maternity home called St. Anne's in downtown Los Angeles until I had my baby. We had Catholic nuns there that they call our house mothers. And so they were really good to me as another aspect of religion that I didn't really know anything about. I just knew that these were religious ladies. And so they were there to take care of us. Some were nice and some were very, very mean and all of this. But I had the baby, which is our oldest daughter, Tamika. And shortly after that, I think when Tamika was 9 months old, Mark and I decided to get married. And so we snuck off and eloped, and we got married and came back. And long story short, in that, we started our family and eventually got our own place. We were 18. We were 18 when we got married. And so I was 17 when I had our daughter, and 18 when we got married. And so we got our own place, eventually moved out. We lived with his mom for a little while, moved out and got our own place. And shortly after that, got pregnant with our second son, our only son, our second child, Tremel. And then each of our children were about 2 years apart, and then we got pregnant with our last daughter, Shekinah. And we were living in some apartments, very rough neighborhood in Los Angeles, right off of Crenshaw and I can't think of Florence, Normandy. I don't remember, but Mark's not. It was a really rough neighborhood. And some women came to our door one day, and where we lived, it reminds you almost like of a prison compound where they had the front door to come in, and it had a bar gate, a black security bar gate on it. And you had to buzz in or whatever for somebody to let you in. And then the inside, it had a concrete court, and then they had 2 levels, that where the apartments were. And so out on the balcony, you could look down. And so it was always locked because there was a lot of crime. I mean, it was just like a war zone at night with machine guns you're hearing firing, helicopters, all of it. It was just really bad. Well, this one Saturday, these 2 little ladies ended up, and we lived at the back, ended up in our apartments. They got in somehow and came all the way back upstairs to our apartment, knocked on the door and asked if we wanted to have Bible studies, or they were talking to us. And Mark was like, "What? Who are you? Where are you from? And come on in." I was like, "Oh, Seventh-day Adventists," because first we thought they were Jehovah's Witnesses, and we were like, "No, we weren't interested." And they said they were Seventh-day Adventists. And because Mark had had some experience with that, but not a lot, and then he had converted over to being a Baptist, and we had started going to his grandmother's church, and he was like, "Come on in, I'm going to show you guys which day is the Sabbath." And because we had a book that my mom had gotten, I think it was like an encyclopedia of some sort, that said in there Sunday was the Lord's Day. And so you show him, see, it says Sunday is the Lord's Day. And from there we just started studying with them, and the Lord lit us on fire at that time in a way that he had never done before in the word, and then understanding the word. These 2 ladies eventually brought one of the elders to the church that started studying with us, Brother Don Nolan. He started studying. Those ladies, I mean, they would come every Sabbath. And then they introduced us to another good friend of ours that still Ken knows, Norman Baker. And Norman was all over the place. He was having Bible studies, I don't know how many times. And we connected with Norman, and we would be every week a couple of his Bible studies, and then studying with the people that came with us initially. And then we met this other guy, Perry. He was married to a Jehovah's Witness, but he was Seventh-day Adventist. Don't ask me how that worked, but they did that. And we studied with him. So God had us on fire, and we were just witnessing and just powerful for the Lord, just trying to tell everybody. But it was difficult because we were in the Baptist church, and we had stopped going to that church that we were going to as children. But Mark's grandmother had a church. We had a wonderful pastor, and then all of his cousins and his brothers and sisters and his mom, grandmother, we were all in that church together, that little Baptist church together, when we started studying with the Adventists. So it was hard to break away from there. So for about a year, we kept going on Sabbath, and then we would go on Sunday too. And we kept doing that until we decided that we needed to talk to the pastor, and we started calling him and trying to talk to him about it. And he would give excuses, basically, not really any biblical support for anything, until I guess he just got tired, and he was like, one night we called and we were like, "But the Bible says this, and the Bible says," and he was like, "My dinner is ready, I gotta go." And we were said that was it, we were done. And we stopped going to the Sunday church after that, and start going to the Seventh-day Adventist church. But of course, Satan, hating the family and hating what God was doing and working through us, and the example that God was using, really started coming in, and then impacting our marriage and bringing in conflict. And it just got really turbulent between us, because remember, we were 18 when we got married. And by the time that the folks came to talked to us about the Sabbath. I was pregnant with my third child, Shekinah, and so when I had her, we were about 21. So we were still very, very young, not knowing about marriage, not knowing about selflessness, all of these different things that you need to have a successful marriage. We didn't know. And so conflict came in, and over the years, still we would separate and get back together, separate back and forth until finally we were like, that's it. And I don't want to do this anymore. And so we separated and eventually got a divorce. And with that, it catapulted me back into the world, back into my party days. And so I started going back out clubbing and drinking. And that's all I did. I've never been drugs or smoking or anything like that, and still not very much of a drinker. And anybody that knows me knows more, I'm a control freak. And I like being in control. And so alcohol made me feel like I was not in control of myself. So I didn't really like drinking it. I mean, I've never liked the feeling of not being able to control or feeling also. I didn't do it very much. But I did get back out there. And the Lord started slowly bringing me back. And I was out there so long, and not so long, because with our separation and divorce, I think it probably was over a 2 or 3 year period. We were divorced for like a year, but the separation was longer than that. And while I was out there living my wild life, and I had gotten so far away from the Lord that I could not even pray. I would be ready to go out to the party or the club, and then I would get on my knees and I would try to pray, and I couldn't pray. And all I could say was, help me, Lord, help me. And I would get up and go out and do my thing again. And I don't remember who it was and how I started getting back, but somebody I came in contact with invited me. I think they were at the club too, because there was a lot of us Adventists up in the club together. We would see each other, and somebody invited me to go to church, and I started going to this one church. And so I would be in the church on Saturday, and then I would be at the club Saturday night and Wednesday night and Thursday night, and Friday. I was still doing my thing, but God kept telling me, just keep coming, just keep coming. And slowly he started pulling me out of these things. He said, now get involved. Don't just go to church and sit in the pew, get involved. So I said, okay, well, Lord, what? And so I started trying to be involved in certain different ministries that they had. And so I got involved, and eventually the clubbing stopped. But then something else happened. Mark started coming back around, and I'm just like, what was this? What's going on? But God had been working on him, and he had turned into this person that was just, I didn't, know, but his heart, God had changed his heart. And he started coming around, and then started coming to church with me or he would come separately. And then I would think, he's trying to sit by me with the kids, and I'm trying to do my own thing in there, meet new people or whatever. And I was trying to manipulate to get away or whatever. And people eventually stopped fighting it, and we would sit together, and people was like, oh, you're such a beautiful couple. And was like, we're divorced. And they're, oh, no, that's horrible. We're going to pray. And we're like, no, don't do that. We just got out of this. We don't want to get back into it. But people kept praying for us. And eventually the Lord brought us back together. And it was amazing, because the things that God had to do to bring us back together. I had a job at a cable company, TCI Cable Vision, which I thought, all this, I was making fairly good money, able to take care of me and the kids, felt like I didn't need too much. And I got laid off. Everybody within one day, I think over 2,000 people across the nation got laid off, and I was one of them. And that put me in a bad situation. And I couldn't hardly work to get money to take care of the kids. And eventually my mom said, why don't you come back to LA? Because we lived out in Loma Linda, Redlands, Loma Linda. Mark and I had moved away to get away from the city life with our kids. And I didn't want to live there. I knew I didn't want to go back to LA, but Mark came back around. He was there, and he said, why don't you go, Terry, if that's what you want to do, and I'll stay with the kids and take care of them. And I did. I would go and take the train to LA during the week and work. And Mark was working, but he was taking care of the kids too. He was combing the girls' hair the best he could. He was teaching them, fixing dinner, doing all of these things. And God was allowing me to see that when I would come back. I would come back on the weekends. And when I would come back, I would go straight to my bedroom and close the door. Like, you guys do your thing out there. Don't involve me in what you're doing. But slowly, I would come and Mark would keep asking me to marry him again. And I just thought, our marriage was over and I didn't want to do this. I was afraid. But one night, Mark got really, really sick. And it was like he had a raging fever and just everything. And through that fever and all of that, he still went out to work. And that was the night that I felt God melt my heart for him in a different, all the cold iciness that I had towards him, God melted it in that moment. And I had told him before that not to ask me to marry him anymore, that I felt that we were over and that we both just needed to move on. And one night I was at my mom and we were talking on the phone and I told him, anytime that you want to, you can ask me to marry you again. And so by the time I got back that weekend, he had roses and he had the kids and I walked in and he got down on one knee and proposed to me and asked me to remarry him. And I said yes. And we got remarried. And during that time, people said that it was like they could see the Holy Spirit glow on us. And it was multiple people that were telling, and I believe that that was the Lord that had done that in us. He had done something for both of us, that he did some kind of healing and brought us together in our marriage and healed it in a way that it's never been that horrible thing that it was before when we were outside of the Lord. And although we had come in, we had not accepted things. And so I'm not saying everything was just perfect down there, but it was still growing. But we committed to each other in a way that we had never committed. Well, shortly after we got back together, we started hearing about this thing that may happen in the world called Y2K. And so everybody was talking about it and saying, if this thing comes and hits in the city, especially LA, you're in a desert. And if this thing hits, there's no water like running through the land like in North Carolina. You can get water almost anywhere. You don't have to go to a sink to get it. It's running through the ground. That's not how it is in LA. They truck water in, or they have to have plants and all of this and food and everything. So they were like, if this Y2K thing happens and things shut down within a few days, it could be mayhem. And you don't want to be in the city if something like that happens. So we kept praying about it, and our friend Norman ended up coming back to town. He and his family had moved to North Carolina and we didn't know it. And they came back to town really trying to encourage people to get out of the city, to get out of. So we started listening and we were like, we need to do this. So we went to visit. They said we could come and visit them. And we went to visit Norman and his wife. And we fell in love with North Carolina and prayed. And so they said, okay, we were like, we're going to do it. And we packed up all of our stuff and one bag each, gym bag of stuff with our kids in our little car. And we drove to North Carolina and we sold everything else. Norman and them let us live with them for about a month and a half. We found a place and that's where the Lord had us. And we kept looking for a church. We had visited Banner Elk. They had a different pastor at that time. We visited Boone. We kept praying and we went to another church for a while. But then Mark was a EKG technician in the hospital, and he saw this little lady. He said she just seemed so different. She wore her little nurse's cap and was just perfect and all. And he eventually started talking to her, and her name was Sandy Boss. And Sandy Boss found out was Seventh-day Adventist. And she invited us to start going to the Valley Cruces Seventh-day Adventist Church, where we started going. And if you don't know, Valley Cruces Seventh-day Adventist Church was the oldest, and it's connected, Banner Elk and Valley Cruces, that's the heritage of that church and the folks there. And so we learned about that little church and we started going there. Well, eventually the pastors had three churches. So they had Banner Elk, they had Valley Cruces, and they had Boone. And what would happen with the pastors is that because we only had about 8 to 10 members at Valley Cruces, they're like, we're not coming there anymore. We're sorry, but you guys are on your own. But the Lord used that time to let Mark cut his teeth on preaching and really getting in the word. And he had done that before with him when he worked EKG in California. Mark had read through every single Spirit of Prophecy book because he was EKG tech and he was there and he had hours and hours of time just hearing the monitors and his books. He had done that. And then this time the Lord said, it's time for you to get out there and really start doing the work. And he did. And he really started learning how to preach. And so every Sabbath, it was his responsibility to give the message. And this is where the Lord started teaching us how to work for him and taught us that you don't go to church just to get fed, because you hear all of that. Especially in California, you hear all of this like, oh, how was the church service today? Oh, I didn't get fed today. Or it was, like you weren't taken care of. The Lord taught us that you go to church to take care of others. You go to church to keep your eyes open to see who is in need, who needs help, who needs a word of encouragement. And so that's what God did and brought us along in our walk. And so eventually we got really, it was hard on him being the only one every Sabbath. He didn't get a break. And so we decided that we were not going to go to Valley Cruces anymore because people were getting upset when we took a break and all. And so everybody said, we'll just go ahead and disband, everybody go their own way. Well, Ken Hodges called, I guess, when he had heard this, and he extended an invitation for us to come to Banner Elk. Said that they really needed folks to be there and they needed folks to work. And so we were looking between Banner Elk and Boone, but Ken reached out to us for Banner Elk. And by God's grace, we prayed, and that's where we ended up and have been blessed from being there ever since. God has helped our walk. And I'm going to hurry up and finish, but I do want to say, in our lives, God has allowed us to go through things because we think, we've gotten to this place and we're working. Well, God said, no, there's still things that you have to know, you have to do, that I need to work through you or whatever. So the last few years, 8 years or so, we've had tragedies that have just been very, very difficult for us. Initially, the first one was our house burned down. We bought a house in 2008, and I don't know so it was 2012, and we had a house fire, and we lost our house, we lost everything. And Mark had gotten laid off work too, and so it was just really hard. And but even during that, us losing everything, God still let us know that he was taking care of us. And so we ended up moving to a little place in Fosco that's between Banner Elk and Boone, where we live, in apartments, and ended up living right across the can't even say the street, the driveway from our daughter Tamika and her husband and their family, which was a blessing. And so we lived there, and God put us on a road that was called Peaceful Haven as a daily reminder coming up that road that he was taking care of us. Yes, you're going through this. Yes, you may feel like you've lost everything, but I need you to know that that stuff was doing nothing for you. The job, all of those things, I'm the one that's taking care of you. And so we went through that thing. So it took almost a year or so. That was October 2012. Went 2013 and going into 2014, and our house was almost done. And January 2014, January 23rd, we get a call at 3:30 in the morning. And it's our daughter-in-law. Our son Tremel had gotten married. He was 28 years old, and our daughter-in-law calling to say that we needed to get there to the hospital, that something had happened to him. And I was like, what has happened? What's going on? And she said that he had hung himself, but that the ambulance was there, that they were working on him to help him. And so we rushed to get there, and we're praying, praying that God would work this out and let everything be okay. So we're driving. I could hardly walk, to get to the car. Mark, had to hold me up to get to the car. We get to the hospital. They hadn't gotten there with him to the hospital, and they barely lived 5 minutes from the hospital. And I knew at that moment that my son was gone, that if they hadn't gotten to him and they had been working on him, we were probably 20 minutes or so from the hospital, and we got there before them. And so we lost our son, our only son, Tremel. He took his own life. And that's been 6 years ago now. And that has been a blow that could have destroyed us, if not for all the other things. And I believe, Mark and I both believe, that the house fire even was like a primer for loss that God was prepping us for, to say, you need to get used to letting everything go. And so we did that first with the house and all of those things. And I believe God prepped us for that. And then to lose our son, it's a loss that is still every day. We're still working. I know with me, it's a battle every day to live through this loss. But it helps me to learn to depend on the Lord, depend on him, to turn to him. Oftentimes I like this week, I don't know what's been going. It's been a difficult week for me. And it's like I've been kind of running from the Lord, but he always brings me back. And I know that there's nowhere for me to run to but him. And so God always brings me back to him. And so I'm very, very grateful for the walk that God has given me and my family and the journey. And I have faith that God has promised, his promises, that he's going to bring us through this, and that we will be in heaven together by God's grace with our son, with my mom that I lost. I didn't mention that she died of brain cancer a few years before that. And so we've just had a lot of stuff. Mark lost his mom. It's just been a whole lot that God has brought us through to strengthen us and to bring us closer to him, and to help us to start letting other things go, to just hold on to him. And so I'm very grateful for the life that God has given us here in North Carolina. Mark and I now have 12 grandchildren from our daughters and their lives and everything, which has helped to fill our lives. And so I'm very grateful. And I thank you all for this opportunity to share my testimony.
Amen. Thank you, Terry. Thank you. That was beautiful.